Hey everybody, Mungo Dark Matter here, and today I thought I'd talk about whether cell phone radiation blockers work or not. So I'm going to try to explain it as simply as possible, but I'm going to need to explain to you what EMR or electromagnetic radiation is, how it differs from nuclear radiation, and how cell phones and other devices generate EMR and how EMR or various EMR can be blocked. I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible, as I said, so I might kind of oversimplify certain things, but this is basically uh, going to explain it to most people as much as they need to know. EMR is actually, or electromagnetic radiation, it's actually the same thing as EMF, basically. EMF is an electromagnetic field or electromagnetic frequency. And so, like, the simplest way to explain this is if you have a magnet or you have a compass that has a magnet in it, a magnet generates an electromagnetic field. You probably remember in science class in school where you might have put a magnet down and then you took iron shavings and put it around it, and it actually showed you what the electromagnetic field looked like. So that's kind of what we're talking about, basically. And all electronic devices put out some sort of EMR, and also the Earth itself puts out an electromagnetic field. It's the Earth is basically a giant magnet. So EMR or EMF is around us all over the place. Now the problem is that there's natural kind of EMR and EMF, some of which is harmless and some of which can be harmful, and there's kind of the human generated EMR, which is what people are generally worried about. For instance, your Wi-Fi in your house generates a radio frequency, which is EMR. Now, when you call it EMR, electromagnetic radiation, it sounds really pretty scary because we think of nuclear radiation. Nuclear radiation is EMR. It's an electromagnetic type of radiation, but it's much more intense. And so it causes a lot of damage, particularly if you're exposed to it for longer periods. The easiest way to explain what this is like is to talk about heat. Now, if you touch something that's 90 degrees, it will feel warm to you, but it's not going to burn you. Your body is actually typically 96 to 97 degrees in temperature. So 90 degrees is actually a little colder than your body is. Now, if you touch something a couple hundred degrees, it's going to burn you. And if you touch something that's like 5,000 degrees, it might vaporize you because it's so hot. Also, it's very similar to when you burn yourself. Depending on how hot something is, can affect how much you're burned by it. Also, your exposure to it and how close you are to it. As you move your hand towards something that's hot or very, very warm, you can feel the heat radiating off of it as you get closer and closer, and it feels hotter and hotter to your hand. If you touch it, it might burn you, but if you're a foot away, you might feel it, but it might not actually burn you, depending on what the temperature is. Now, the longer you hold your hand to something that's very hot and that's burning you, the worse the burn gets, right? So by your reaction naturally to such a thing is you touch something that's very hot and you move your hand away quickly, and that is the way your body and your brain like get your hand out of the way of danger so that it doesn't get damaged more. It reduces the amount of damage. Well, it's the same thing with electromagnetic radiation. Now, electromagnetic radiation is generated by light, radio waves, gamma rays, X-rays, and by radioactive substances like plutonium and uranium. The difference between nuclear radiation and electromagnetic radiation is basically the intensity. Also, as you go up, like light is the least intense, radio waves is like the next intensity. As you get up higher in frequency in the radio waves towards X-rays, or not X-rays, towards microwaves, those actually can do more damage to you. And gamma rays and X-rays, they can do more damage to you as well. But when you go to the dentist, or sometimes when you go to the doctor as well, you might get an X-ray. If you go to the dentist, like probably once a year, they give you an X-ray, but they limit the exposure of that. And it's just the same as if you put your hand very close to a very hot source and hold it there very long, you're going to get burned over the longer that you hold your hand, and the closer that you hold your hand to something, you're going to get burned more. And so, but if something's like maybe 100 degrees or 150 degrees, and your hand's away from it, it's not as bad, because actually, even though the thing is generating a lot of heat over that distance, the heat gets less, so it won't burn you if you're a certain distance from it. But the closer you get, the more you feel the heat, and when you get to a certain point, if the source is hot enough, it will burn you. So it's the same thing with electromagnetic radiation. So if you're standing up to something that's generating a lot of electromagnetic radiation, it will do damage to you. It can actually burn you. A radio wave can actually burn you if it's powerful enough. But if you're miles away from it, the effect may be negligible or less. So when you're listening to a radio, your radio itself, when it's listening to a frequency, where the radiation is coming from is from the radio station. In that transmitter is very powerful, but you're a distance away from it. So your radio picks it up, and you're a safe distance from it. But there are distances you don't want to get too close to the transmitting antenna of a radio station. If you were right up next to it when it was broadcasting, that could actually do damage to you. But when you're miles away from it, it's negligible. Now your radio itself, if you just have it on and it's not really listening to anything, it's not really generating that much EMR, because really if you have a two-way radio that actually transmits, the most radiation is coming out when it's transmitting. So a radio that's listening, it will actually put out a little EMR, but that's not from listening. It's actually from the fact that it's an electronic device. You may have seen, if you were watching like broadcast TV or listening to broadcast radio, and somebody turns on a vacuum cleaner or they turn on a blender, they may be a little more shielded now, but it used to be somebody would turn that on, you'd be watching TV, and there'd be static. Now when we're watching cable TV, it might not be as noticeable, although it might be noticeable if the vacuum cleaner or the blender's close enough. But if you turn that on near something, the blender, the motor in the blender, when it goes on, it has magnets in it, and when that electricity goes into it, it starts to generate a more powerful electromagnetic field. Still not so great that it's going to be a danger to you, particularly since you don't have the blender on 24 hours a day. But that will cause interference, and one way you can test this is if you put an AM radio, which is AM radio is a little more, it picks up that type of interference more. So if you put an AM radio next to your blender and you turn the blender on, you'll probably hear static on the radio. Also, you may have noticed if you listen to an AM radio, particularly, it doesn't affect FM as much, although it can. It can affect a lot of different things. If you take an AM radio, turn it on, and put your cell phone right next to it, and listen to the radio for a while, every now and then you will hear like some signal or noise that you wouldn't if your cell phone wasn't there. And that's because the cell phone actually, even when you're not using the cell phone, it's sending signals to the tower, because a cell phone listens through the towers, the cell towers, and it tries to communicate with them so it can figure out which cell tower is closest and has the best signal and which one to connect to. So they're always talking back and forth. A cell phone, it's kind of like a radio when you're not, just a broadcast radio when you're not using it, because it's not really putting out that much EMR until you're actually using it. So if you're talking to someone, it's actually transmitting. but it does transmit all the time a little bit. And so, but that's just a very small amount, and it's not that strong of a signal. In fact, cell phones, and if you have a two-way handheld radio, by law, they're limited to the amount of power they can put out, because if they put out over a certain amount of power, they can actually do noticeable damage to you right away, because it's the EMR is more powerful. It's kind of like if you're standing next to something and it's hot, and then it starts to get hotter. The hotter it is and the closer you are to it and the longer you're exposed to it has to do with the damage of a burn when you're talking about heat. It's the same with EMR. So with handheld devices, there's a kind of a legal limit. The FCC regulates electronic devices also because of they produce radio frequencies which can interfere with radio. So all of that's kind of regulated to a certain extent to keep things from putting off so much energy that they can do damage to you. So we have these devices. So now the question is, does a cell phone radiation do cell phone radiation blockers work? Well, there's no scientific proof according to the FTC that they work, and just doing some research on it, I didn't find any proof that they work. But here's the thing: if I have a cell phone like this, and it's radiating out EMR, it's radiating it some pattern that's going around it. See, it's going around the entire cell phone. So if you put something on the back, let's just say you put a metal plate over the entire back of it, that metal plate would theoretically block signals coming directly out of the back of it. So if you had that pointed toward you, it should reduce the amount of EMR you're getting. But you're still getting EMR from the front and the sides of it, because that's coming around. It's still exposing you to that EMR. So just covering the back of it won't stop the EMR. There's something called a Faraday cage that you can make that will block any signals from coming in. But if you put a cell phone in a Faraday cage, it blocks all the signals around it, and it can't work because it can't even communicate to anything. But at least you're not getting, EMR from it. So that means in order to totally block or protect yourself from EMR from a device, you would have to encase it totally in something that would block all signals coming from it. And then the device wouldn't work, so it would be useless. It would be easier just to put your cell phone into airplane mode, or just to turn it off entirely. If you put it in airplane mode, it's no longer transmitting radio waves, but it still has EMR on it because it's an electronic device and it's on, just like a magnet is always generating EMR. So there are a few problems with these devices, these radiation devices from cell phones. First of all, usually the ones that I saw and looked up, they look like just a pop socket like this, just a round disc on the back of your cell phone. And that isn't even covering the entire back of the cell phone. And now somehow or other they're supposed to work so that they're blocking everything from the back. But there are two things to consider. First of all, if it's actually blocking stuff around the back, the cell phone itself might actually have problems connecting to towers when they're in certain positions, and it might actually start sending out more signals and producing more EMR, because, as I said, when its cell phone is transmitting, it will put out more EMR. And because you have because the phone is having problems connecting to the cell phone tower, and remember I said that it's always trying to find the best cell phone tower, so as you're moving along, it's looking for the strongest signal, and it will send out signals communicating to these different cell towers. So if you have something that's actually blocking one side of it, and when you are in certain areas, that side might also be towards where a cell tower is, and if it was actually effective or somewhat effective, your cell phone might actually start transmitting more, trying to find a better cell tower to connect to. So that could actually cause more EMR to come out of the cell phone. The other thing is that something that you put on the back that you're trying to block, and you think you're blocking uh, electromagnetic radiation with, might actually act as an antenna. It might actually, it could actually transmit more or cause more problems than it solves, because uh, an antenna is just a piece of metal basically, and it's usually a wire or something, or a pole that's made out of metal. So technically that might even cause some problems. So, and in the research I did, it said that sometimes some of these devices might actually generate more, and I think those are the ways that they're talking about, that either it's blocking a signal so that it's transmitting more, or when it does transmit, the the device that's on the back of it acts as an antenna, and an antenna will actually amplify the signal to a certain to a certain extent, or concentrate it. So those are the things to consider. So basically, cell phone radiation blockers, no scientific uh, proof that they work, and really, I saw some of these things on Amazon for like $50, and it looks like a pop socket. You can get that for like $10, I think. And if it's doing nothing, why not get a pop socket that actually does something? Uh, as opposed to having something that doesn't do anything, or might be causing more harm, and it's costing like 5 times as much. All right, so that's all I had to say about the topic. I probably went on a little bit too long, but it's something that concerns a lot of people, and definitely you want to keep away from probably electromagnetic radiation or excessive amounts of it. Just like I said, you don't want to be in a room that's 200 degrees. You want to last long. So you want to probably limit your exposure, and that's reasonable for people to want to limit their exposure. But one of the things you can do is like turn off your Wi-Fi when you're not using it at night, or put the Wi-Fi away from where you're going to be sitting. You don't want to be sitting maybe right next to the Wi-Fi, because you're going to get more exposure to it the closer you are. Probably even already noticed, if you have a big house and you have the Wi-Fi at one end and you go to the other end, it's harder for your device to pick it up. That's because the signal's getting less. It's just like if you have a heat source and you're getting farther from it, it's less hot. You feel less heat from it. I'm Mungo Dark Matter. And whatever you do, enjoy technology, enjoy the day, and I will see you next time.